Good morning. This is Dr. David A. Padgett. This is World Regional Geography 1010 98A, and we have made it to the last day of class. Well, not the last day of the semester, the last day of class. So we will have this class, and then I will send out an announcement about the final exam. Again, the final exam will be released on Friday. Uh, there will be two exams. Um, well, actually, it'll be an exam project. So you won't have an exam like the Unit A exam. You will complete a project. Those of you who are planning to be teachers will have a globe project to complete. I might talk about that a little bit today. Those of you who are not planning on being teachers will have a geographic information systems, a GIS project to complete. The plan is to release the exam on Friday, April 23rd. It will be due, absolutely due on April the 29th. So it gives you about 7 days to get the final exam done. This final exam project done. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later. I'm going to share my screen now. Oops. And so as usual, I'll do a little housekeeping and then we'll get into the lecture for the day, the last lecture for the semester. So the reading assignments, of course, are up there to help you with, well, now this week's research quiz. So again, for this week, let me go to student view just so that, again, for this week, your, excuse me. Oh, goodness, excuse me. Your assignments for this week, let's start from the bottom. Article Review 9 is due on the 26th, which is Monday. Try to get that done early so you can focus on your final exam. Globe Assignment Part 2. This is for pre-service teachers only, or people planning to be teachers only. So you have this outdoor weather data collection assignment to complete. Okay, that's only for those of you who are planning to be teachers. If you're not planning on being a teacher, then you will complete the Unit D research quiz here. Not planning to be a teacher, that is also due on the 26th. It follows the same format as the other quizzes. And the final exam project, again, will be released on Friday. I will send email reminders. There will be an instructional video for the GIS project. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Globe project today, perhaps. So let's move on. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Let's move on to today's lecture. And we'll be focusing upon the political and cultural geography of Russia and neighboring countries. Excuse me. So one of the major differences between the USA and USSR, so if you remember, These countries were all part of the Soviet Union, a country that dissolved, fell apart in 1991, as you read about in the textbook. And so, so here we are, Russia and neighboring countries. These countries used to be part of one country, which was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Country fell apart in 1991. Prior to 1991, the USA and the USSR were engaged in what was called the Cold War. So the USA and USSR were allies, were on the same side during the Second World War. They were on the victorious side. However, the rivalry between the USSA and the USA and USSR, the rivalry really picked up steam after the Second World War. There was a space race. USA versus USSR were trying to get into space. There was a big weapons buildup as each country attempted to attain global domination and power. Now, for the United States, our vision of government is democracy. Our economic vision is capitalism. For the former Soviet Union, their vision for governing was communism, and they had more of a socialist economic system. So what are the differences between the two? Well, obviously in a democracy, it's one person, one vote, and the majority rules. In a communist system, there's a ruling communist party, and you can have the same person in power for decades, right? So you don't really have, it's more of a centralized government. Everything goes through the top, right? In terms of their government. It's very similar to having a king or queen, but not quite, okay? In our system of government, there are a lot of freedoms. So for a city to make a decision about building a new bridge or a new road, the mayor doesn't have to ask the federal government or the president for permission to build a road in his or her city. There are certain decisions that are made on the state level. And so the governor of a state there are some decisions that don't go past the governor. So we have a democratic, multi-tiered system of governance with, local government and then state government and then federal government. In a communist system, you have much more of a centralized government. So even for some of the smallest things, there has to be there's less autonomy. There has to be some communication with the centralized, I guess what we would call federal government, even to make decisions on a local level. So you can see there were differences there. Then of course we have capitalism versus socialism. So we all know how capitalism works, right? It's a competitive system. It's a competitive system. There's no guarantees in a capitalist system. No guarantees. You might work hard, and in theory, in a capitalist system, if you work hard and you do the right things, get an education, then you should be successful. And for the most part, that it does work out that way. Work hard, be creative, learn a skill, become talented, and then you can be successful in a capitalist model. At least that's the way it's supposed to work. But what's interesting in a capitalist system is how various types of labor are valued. Okay, so for instance, let's say Judge Judy. Some of you all may know Judge Judy from television. Now, Judge Judy was probably a very good judge. She was probably a very good judge wherever she was practicing. Maybe she made, in that capacity as a real judge, six figures, maybe 200 some $1,000 per year, perhaps, maybe. If she was a municipal judge or some kind of judge. Take Judge Judy. Now Judge Judy goes and she's on television, and she's still a real judge, but not really. She's kind of a pretend judge now. Judge Judy Shineland makes $45 million a year, pretending to be a judge. Yeah, so you can have somebody who goes to medical school, goes to college, becomes a real doctor, might make $80,000 a year, maybe $100,000 a year. But then somebody on TV who's pretending to be a doctor, never, maybe not even graduated from high school, just somehow made it in Hollywood as an actor or actress, that person could make, let's say if they're on Grey's Anatomy, $1 million per episode. Pretending to be a doctor. So in a capitalist system, you know, the value of labor depends upon consumer demand, right? So it's not really, so you could be doing something that you think like being a doctor or a dentist that is valuable to society that, you know, we couldn't really do. Look at what happened with this COVID-19, all these medical professionals on the front lines in the labs rescued us from this, or are rescuing, it's not over yet, but are rescuing us from this pandemic. People with medical training. However, again, if those same people were, if they make a movie, if there's a movie made about COVID-19 and there's some actors and actresses pretending to be nurses, pretending to be doctors, pretending to be scientists, they'll make a whole lot more money than the people who were actually doing the work. So in a capitalist system, the value of labor is interesting. You know, it's interesting. Whereas in a socialist system, all labor is valued the same. You know, if you're a real doctor, you're a fake doctor, you're gonna make the same amount of money in a purely socialist system. Nobody's better than anybody else. Sounds real good, doesn't it? Right? Especially for those of you who are going into teaching. I mean, teachers are struggling right now financially, always, but yet we wouldn't have any doctors or lawyers or nurses without teachers. But yet we don't, you know, teachers aren't paid well, considering the work that they do. But if we had a communist system, if we had, a socialist system, then teachers, professional basketball players, attorneys, everybody would make the same amount of money. Everybody's contribution to society would be valued equally. But that's not the case in a capitalist system. So you can see these two systems were diametrically opposed, right? And so the Soviet Union was trying to engage in world domination, and the USA was trying to become the dominant country in the world. You know, and if you look back at Hollywood, a lot of movies were made about this. You know, if you go to any old James Bond movie, the enemy was always the Russians, the Soviet Union, right? played out in Hollywood, the struggle. So I guess eventually, if you want to keep score, the United States won because the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And you might ask, well, wait, who were they wrong? I mean, there was were they wrong? Was the Soviet Union just wrong? Well, it just depends upon how you look at it. In a socialist economy, medical care is free, right? Free of charge. While in our capitalist system, the number one reason for people going bankrupt in this country, in the United States, is they get sick. Illness and inability to pay medical bills is the number one reason why people go bankrupt. So, something you have, in many cases, no control over. Right? You can't control whether or not you get, cancer. I mean, some people might say, but I mean, if it's something that just, it just happens. You get sick, can't afford the medical bill, whatever your insurance won't pay or doesn't pay or can't, whatever, you just don't have insurance. Something happens to you or somebody in your family, and you're broke for the rest of your life, bankrupt. That seems kind of cold. Whereas in a socialist system, if you get sick, no problem. And that's why we can look at places like Canada, which has somewhat of a socialist medical system, or Cuba, which is a communist government, and some of their health outcomes, life expectancy, and infant mortality are better than ours, even though we have more money. Right? So so what happened? Oh, I forgot. Free tuition. If you're in a purely socialist system, nobody's paying college tuition. What's the big story in the news right now is this multi-trillion-dollar student loan debt. You go to school, you take out loans, and you never are able to repay them. Credit's messed up, can't buy a house, maybe not even a car, maybe not even be able to get into an apartment because of your student loan debt. And even though President Biden is saying he's going to cancel some student loan debt, it's only right now about 0.2% of the total that's owed. So yeah, some people got forgiven, maybe like 40, 50,000 people, but the rest of people still, writing those checks every month. So, so let's see, communist socialist system, free medical care, free tuition, everybody's labor is equally valued, but the thing collapsed. And when we looked at the economics of it, we saw that many of these countries are relatively low income. So what happened? Well, if you think about it, if you're made too many guarantees, not everybody, but if certain people are given too many guarantees, how hard are they really going to work? What if at Tennessee State University, we said, no matter what you do in a class, you will get a C, at least at least a C. If you just show up one day and you never come back again, you'll get a C. All right. Now, maybe not those of you all in this class, but you probably know people who would graduate with a 2.0 GPA, a 2.5, I guess that's a C. They just hang out for 4 years, show up the first day, not do anything, get that C. But then at the end of the day, what have they learned? What can they do? What skill sets do they have? None. Right? They just paid to get. So if there was no competitive incentive, the competitive incentive is if you work hard, you'll get an A. If you work hard, maybe almost as hard as an A person, you'll get a B. And if you're average, you'll get a C. And if you're not average, you don't do anything, you get a D. And if you really, really don't do anything, you'll get an F. And if you get too many Fs, we'll send you home, right? That's a competitive environment. So people are incentivized to perform and work hard. Whereas if you have a system where people have guarantees, like I said, if you're guaranteed a C no matter what you do, you're going to have a lot of people who aren't going to do anything, right? And so the same thing happens in perhaps an economic system where there's no real competition. Why would you be creative? Why invent anything? I almost forgot. In a socialist system, there is no private enterprise. There's no privately owned companies. So there's no, you're not going to go on and invent something and get rich as an individual, right? Because all of that is owned by the government. So what incentive do you have to be creative, to be innovative? Now, the freedom of creativity and innovation there's a downside. You know, somebody was making a lot of money off of DVDs. That's gone now, right? When's the last time you bought a DVD or a CD, right? All those DVD and CD players, where are they now, right? There's winners and losers in a capitalist system. You invent something, you create something that's better, that garners the attention of the consumer, and you will put somebody out of business, right? Your restaurant is better than the restaurant down the street. Everybody comes to your restaurant, that restaurant goes out of business. There are winners and losers in the capitalist system. But it does make people perform and work harder to be better than the other person, so you can get the rewards, the financial rewards from that, right? So some would say that was the issue in terms of the Soviet Union not being economically competitive, because there were no rewards for it. You know, sure, you have a lot of guarantees, but then you have no incentive to work hard because the guarantees are in place. Whereas in a capitalist system, if you don't work hard and you don't hustle or do something, you're going to end up broke and in the streets. Not that that's, and that might happen to you regardless of how hard you work. I mean, things happen to people, and that's one of the differences between capitalism and socialism. Is in a capitalist system, in our country, if people are poor, we look at it as this their fault that they're poor. Right? What did you do wrong that had you wind up being poor? So we look at people who aren't financially successful as being failures, as being I don't know, just somebody you just don't want to be that, you know. Whereas in other cultures that are more socialist leaning, if a person happens to be poor, it's just seen as being a misfortune. Just the way that life shook out, right? You just didn't want to be a rich person. It's not your fault. Not everybody can be rich, right? If everybody was rich, it would be normal. There wouldn't be any different, you know, but that wouldn't, there's got to be a distinction, right? But anyway, so we had this Cold War struggle between the Soviet Union and the USA that started after the Second World War and went up to 1991. There's a lot more to it politically. that I could go into. But at the end of the day, we wound up with all these countries. Now, you would think that these countries, now another thing I want to mention. The countries that were part of this Soviet Union weren't always there voluntarily. Some of these countries were annexed, meaning that they were involuntarily recruited to become part of the Soviet Union and weren't really happy about it for a variety of reasons that I'll start to get into in a moment. Okay, so if we go back to the reading assignment, let's get into some of the issues that are challenging some of these countries. Okay, so you would think that these countries, again, many of them were not happy during their time as being part of the Soviet Union. They weren't real happy about it because you had this kind of top-down rule. What were some of the major issues that would result in some of these countries, as it says here, having a struggle for democracy? So these were not, the Soviet Union was not a democratic nation. And so some of these now countries decided, well, okay, well, we want freedom. Isn't that what we call the United States, the land of the free? Because we get to pick our leaders. So that's the opportunity that countries like Azerbaijan, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, and Georgia had after they escaped from the Soviet Union. And you can see here, there's revolutions. This is all after they got their freedom. Revolutions, conflict, sort of like what we had here on January 6th of this year, except a lot worse, right? I mean, here the protesters stormed the palace of Kyrgyzstan, and the president left. Left the country. Now, in our case, it was a skirmish, but certainly we didn't. And the Congress persons did evacuate the capital here, but that was just temporary. I mean, when in these cases, people leave permanently, and so you see that there was a struggle in this part of the world for these new nations. Like I said, this has only been since 1991, so about 30 years into this. There are countries, there are nations that are thousands of years old on this earth. But these new nations are struggling. You would think that after being held under communist governing rule, under this centralized government, that these people couldn't wait to become free and democratic. But they're having all kinds of problems. You think this would be easy. Why are these people having such a difficult time becoming democratic like us? Well, if you think about it, for most of human history, for the majority of human history, there has not been democracy. There's been kings, queens, pharaohs, czars, emperors. I mean, for the most part, we've had monarchs. There are very few monarchies left, but for most of human history, this whole democratic, you get to vote for your leader thing was not happening. You didn't get to vote for who was king or queen. There was no voting. You didn't get to vote for who's going to be emperor or who's going to be pharaoh. That's not how it worked, right? Who's going to be chief? That's not how it worked. So there's a saying that you can't miss what you never had, right? So if you've never had democracy ever, and now here's your chance to become engaged in a democratic system, it might be a little scary, because with democracy, there's responsibility. I mean, in this country, okay, we have people there shouldn't be any reason that people aren't able to vote, but that's a question that's been coming up, for a long time. But in theory, everybody should be able to vote if they want to. But there are people who just don't exercise the right, or maybe they exercise the right sometimes. They'll vote for the presidential election, but then the midterm congressional elections don't see them. And then for the local elections, forget it. Mayor, council people, hardly anybody. So we have freedom to vote, and we don't even exercise. A whole lot of us do not. I mean, voter turnout in some cases is extraordinarily low in this democracy where we love freedom, right? But there's a responsibility, because if you vote and you vote for somebody who's crazy, like some people did about 4 years ago, then you have a crazy leader, right? That's how some of these dictators and despots get to power, because, and really, there's a long story behind what happened to get Trump into office. Just in your spare time, there's a documentary called After Selma. It's called After Selma. So if you're into learning more about the political process and voting in this country, check out that doc. After Selma. It might be on YouTube. I don't know. It's called After Selma, like Selma, Alabama. Excellent documentary about the Voting Rights Act and Black history. But so a lot of us don't vote even though we have the right, because it's scary. Like I said, who knows what this person might do? Whoever gets elected, if you voted for him, you're responsible. Whereas some people would rather say, hey, look, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Just have the king or queen be in power and I'll just roll with it. I mean, that's how some people, they would rather be led and not have anything to do with it. So if people are used to having that kind of relationship with the person in power, if they're used to having a king, queen, monarch, czar, whoever, if that's what they've had, now all of a sudden you tell them, oh, you get to vote, they might be like, wait. I don't want to vote. I don't want to be that person. That's a lot of responsibility. What if I vote for this person and they're a horrible leader? Then that's on me, right? A lot of people don't want that level of responsibility in governance. And so that's in part explains some of the struggle that was happening in this part of the world, even after they attained democratic freedom, right? It's not always an easy thing. Okay, let's get deeper into the reading assignment. Let's look at, well, let's go back to the textbook. And let's see. Should be chapter 4. Okay, so moving forward to figure 4.34, I'm using this map to illustrate a very important point, which is a big difference between this part of the world, that is the former Soviet states, and really most of the rest of the world, and us. As you can see on this choropleth map, here's Russia. This is Russia to the north here. And then here's the border between Russia and Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. Okay, so one thing that, we struggle with in this country is the issue of of, let's say, race. So we have people categorized as Black, white, Latinx, Native American, Asian Pacific Islander, so on, and Alaska, Asian. So we have all these various, not all, but we have about 6 major classifications of people that's really not based on any real science. I mean, we could say that people are maybe belong to different races based upon how they look, their appearance, their phenotype, right? But in some cases, that's not always true. I mean, there are Black people who pass for white. There are white people who are legally Black. If you are in Virginia and you're 1/8 Black, you're Black. But if you're in Louisiana, you have to you're 1/32 Black. You're Black. You know, it's legal. It's a legal definition. Doesn't have anything to do with biology. I mean, the whole science of race is bankrupt science, as we talked about earlier in the semester. But one thing that is actually scientifically based is ethnicity. So if you look on this map, for instance, notice that there are color area symbols that represent different ethnic groups. So this green area to the north, that those people are Russian. They are Russian in terms of their ethnicity, in terms of their DNA. Notice that in Azerbaijan, most of the color you see is this blue for Azeris. So that's another ethnic group. Armenia, notice most of the people in the country of Armenia are Armenian ethnically. In Georgia, we have Georgians. So it probably has occurred to you that in other parts of the world, people's ethnicity is directly aligned with their nationality. Right? That's not true in the United States. Our whatever ethnicity we have has nothing to do with our nationality. In fact, it's just the opposite. Our national motto here in the United States is E pluribus unum. That's Latin. It means for many one. For many people, you get one something, I guess, American or whatever, right? Melting pot kind of thing. You know, want to really get into the melting pot, but our ethnicity has nothing to do with being with what that United States of America stands for. Neither does our religion. Now, some people might say, well, we're a Christian country. Well, not really. We're a secular government. That's why there's this big argument about praying in public schools. Like, which prayer are you going to do? There's no United States of America religion that we can agree upon to have in schools. There's who knows how many religions, right? So our ethnicity, our culture, whatever, has nothing to do with our nationality here, but it has everything to do with nationality in other parts of the world, which of course can be problematic. Because if you notice in Azerbaijan, not everybody's an Azeri. In Georgia, not everybody's Georgian. In Armenia, not everybody's Armenian. There are other people who are in these countries who don't share the ethnicity of the ethnic group that the country is named after. So think about that. If you're a minority in, say, Georgia, and the country is mostly Georgians, and the country is called Georgia, how much political power do you really think you're going to have? And it's not as if you can switch. In our country, you can be a Democrat today, you can be a Republican tomorrow. you can switch whatever, in this case, dominant party, whichever party you belong to, you can switch. You could just say, you know what, I'm going to be a Republican today. You can't wake up one morning as an Armenian in Georgia and say, you know what, I'm going to become a Georgian. I'm tired. I'm tired of being Armenian. You can't do that. So this direct association or relationship between nationality and ethnicity can be politically problematic because there's no compromise. You can't compromise on your ethnicity. You are who you are. And so this has been a struggle. This has been a problem in many parts in this part of the world especially, is that people struggle to gain power when they're in a minority because it's obvious that the majority group is not going to give people in the minority group any kind of leverage ever, except maybe in certain local pockets. Yeah, let's look at the Chechnya situation. Okay, so if you go back and look at the map that I just showed you, notice this yellow color area symbol is Chechnya. Chechnya is a republic that is still inside of Russia. Now, they didn't get to escape in 1991 like the Azeris and the Georgians. The Chechens are still inside of Russia. Now, the Chechens are predominantly Muslim. They're predominantly Muslims. So why is that problematic? Well, the old Soviet Union, and to some degree Russia, had a political ideology of atheism. So people of faith were not able to fully express their faith while they were inside of the Soviet Union. So that's why a lot of these people got out, because a lot of people of faith were persecuted in the Soviet Union. There's still some level of that happening in China right now. In fact, during the height of the Cold War, the USA leadership would call Soviets godless. In fact, the reason that our national anthem, our Pledge of Allegiance has one nation under God, that happened in 1954. Under God wasn't part of the original Pledge of Allegiance because we are a secular nation. You don't have to be a person of faith to be represented or part of this nation. You can be an atheist, agnostic, whatever. So we have freedom of religion in this country, even though there's no state-sponsored religion. In the old Soviet Union, it was not freedom of religion. And so that's another reason why these Georgians, Armenians, and people, the Kazakhs and others who are either Muslim or of other faiths left. And a lot of people of faith left the Soviet Union just individually. But the Chechens are still trapped inside of Russia. And they fought a bloody battle for secession for years. I mean, this was not just this has been going on ever since 1991. The Chechens have tried to escape. And in some cases, they have engaged in what some would call terrorist acts, which puts the United States in a difficult position because we are opposed to Muslim-based terrorist organizations, right? That's what we say. But then on the other hand, the Chechens, they're trying to escape our enemy, Russia, but they're using the same tactics, but it's against Russia. And they're also Muslims. So it gets to be quite sticky, as you can see. But Chechens have been fighting this bloody battle to get out of this region or this nation where they might not necessarily be able to practice their Islamic faith freely. So you might ask, well, why would the Soviet Union, or why would any government have an atheist philosophy? Well, think about it. What is the one thing that people will not compromise on? It's religion. Won't compromise. No compromise on religion, right? I mean, you'll compromise. Will compromise on a lot of things. You know, there's people that say, "Well, I'll never date outside my race," and then they meet somebody of a different race and fall in love. Okay, I guess I was wrong, right? There are people who say, "Well, I'll never marry a broke man. Gotta be a rich guy." Meet some guy that has no money, fall in love, stay together 50 years. You know, so we'll compromise on a lot of things. But if a person says, "I only want to be with the Jew, I only want to be with the Catholic, I only want to be with the Christian," there's no compromise on that. I mean, I know people personally. Christian fell in love with a Muslim, couldn't get to the altar. Nobody's gonna say, "You know what, to be with you, I'll give up my God." I don't know. Now, there are some people who compromise at first. You know, you might have a Christian and you might have an AME, African Methodist Episcopalian, marry a Catholic. You know, go to the wedding. They had two little separate ceremonies. Everybody's fine. They find a non-denominational church. Everything's cool until the children come along. And now we got a problem because one person might say, "You know what? I want my kids to be raised Catholic." And the other spouse might not agree with that. And there's no compromise. Next thing you know, these people are divorced. So in theory, if we don't have religion as part of our lexicon, then we should be able to get along, right? Because we can compromise on everything else. So that's why you had this kind of atheist ideal within the Soviet Union. But people of faith obviously didn't feel comfortable, so neither did the Chechens. So Chechnya is engaged in this long-term struggle to try to get out of Russia. It's probably not going to happen. Let's look at some of the dynamics of the relationship between religion and culture and politics in this part of the world. So a couple of years ago, it might be more than a couple of years ago, 2014, Russians invaded Ukraine and took over part of the country. And they still have taken it over. So just to give you an idea of what's been happening, is you can see that this has been quite a violent conflict as Russia has attempted to reel Ukraine back in. And so there's a lot of conflict. And if you remember, the Ukraine was at the center of the controversy around former President Trump's impeachment. You know, so you can see this is quite a conflict. So here it says pro-Russian activists. And these are pro-Russian activists who are inside of Ukraine, who were attempting to help the Russians take over their country. Why? Because they're Russian. They're ethnically Russian. Okay. And this is another part of the problem. So let's look at the Ukraine ethno-linguistic map. So if you notice, here's the country of Ukraine. Russia is over here to the east or on the right. And the red color area symbols represent places where Russians are dominant. And then, of course, when you get into the western part of the country, you get more and more people who are ethnically Ukrainian. So there are a lot of people of Russian descent and Russian or ethnically Russian who are inside of Ukraine. But the country's called Ukraine. And the people who are dominant in the country are Ukrainians. So again, when Ukraine decided to become its own country, there were some Russians who were inside of Ukraine. And over the last 30 years or so, they probably figured out, wait a minute, these Ukrainians are doing things for themselves. They're not really trying to help us out. But we have our own country, Russia, that's right next door, that would love to come over here and take over. Trying to snatch this place back, just like how Russia is holding the Chechens back for different reasons. They're trying to bring Ukraine back. So what happened in 2014, the Russians invaded this Crimean Peninsula and took it over. And it was largely largely a peaceful transition because there's mostly Russian people there. As a matter of fact, they welcome their Russian brothers and sisters to come take over part of their country. And so the Russians have occupied the Crimean Peninsula ever since. And the United States is caught on the fence because on one hand, okay, technically what the Russians did in taking over the Crimean Peninsula kind of goes against all kinds of United Nations conventions, right? But it's not as if the United States, not as if we don't do this, right? We invaded Iraq a couple of times, and not everybody was really in agreement with that. Then we invaded Afghanistan, and not everybody was on board with that. I mean, everybody meaning the rest of the United Nations. But yeah, we went ahead and did it anyway. In fact, we still have troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, not necessarily in an occupation type setting, but still, we have troops there in somebody else's country. So why didn't the United States strike back? Well, this is Russia. This is another. They're not the superpower on the stage that they were when they were the Soviet Union, but yet and still they have nuclear weapons. They have lots of resources. We really don't want to go to war with Russia. I mean, going to war against Afghanistan or Iraq, that's one thing. Going to war against the Soviet Union, against the Russians, it would be a totally different situation. And so, situation that we would not want to get into. I mean, think about it. When was that? It was 2001. 20 years ago, the United States invaded Afghanistan, and that conflict is, well, the war technically is over, but there's still U.S. troops there. President Biden was talking about getting U.S. troops out of Afghanistan last week. So, and that's little Afghanistan. Who knows what would happen if we got into a real conflict with Russia? They don't want, neither side wants that. Okay. So this crisis has continued to this day, and it's largely because of the fact that we have Russians inside of Ukraine who have greater loyalty to Russia by blood than they do to Ukraine in terms of nationality. So in many parts of the world, especially in this part of the world, blood or ethnicity supersedes nationality. Again, something that we just don't have in this country, something that we just don't have at all. So this is another reason why we see conflict, perhaps, as these countries have been attempting to transition to democracy. Russia is still pretty much its old communist self. These other countries have tried to make moves politically. They've tried to become more open economically, engaging in more capitalist ventures such as the development of oil and gas, going into private controlled industries, allowing private companies in. So this part of the world is in flux still. It's been 30 years, only 30 years since 1991, and we can still see a lot of growing pains in this part of the world, largely due to there are a lot of factors involved. So I am going to, that closes out our focus upon the Russia and neighboring countries.